Hi, I'm Brannon Poe, founder of Poe Group Advisors and creator of the Accounting Practice Academy. You are listening to the Accountant's Flight Plan podcast, where we talk about stuff in the accounting world. If you're looking to buy or sell a practice, we are the premier accounting practice intermediary firm in the industry. Check us out at PoeGroupAdvisors.com. If you're a firm owner looking to build a more profitable practice while actually reducing owner hours, sign up for our practice management workshop, which only runs a few times per year. Learn more at accountingpracticeacademy.com. Welcome to the Accountant's Flight Plan podcast. When I say today that I have a very special guest, it's like a super important guest, because this is Carol Poe. This is my wife and our buyer specialist, and she's also a really funny lady, and we're recording it on Valentine's Day. So happy Valentine's Day, hon.
Happy Valentine's Day. I did get you a card.
Yes, she did. And the day's not over yet. So to give you a sense of how funny she can be, she's really funny, and Carol tells amazing stories. I'm going to read her bio that she submitted for this podcast, and I hope it puts a smile on your face. So, in her words, the first time I started at Poe Group was about 20 years ago. I was in the wrong seat, plus had three smallest children at home. Brannon decided to replace me at the office instead of at home, smiley face. I guess I came back in 2008 when we really started growing, and I picked the tasks I wanted to do. I gave myself a lot of titles back then, but finally settled on buyer specialist. I support the brokers and help match the buyers and sellers. I'm the matchmaker at Poe Group Advisors. If I tell a broker I have found a buyer for a particular practice, I'm usually right. So
I do have a funny story. So when I got the email from Erica, your assistant, to be on the podcast, it said, "Dear Carol, we want you on the podcast." And I thought it was a mistake, so I deleted it. So I was like, well, they don't want me. But
well,
so
no, you've got a big role in the company, and you've, one of the things that we have done to keep ourselves, working together well as a couple, is you've got really clear responsibility. Like, you've got a clear lane, and my lane is clear. And that's how we make it work. People ask us, like, how do you work together? And if you're married and you're working together, and we actually don't interact with each other that often on a day-to-day basis at work. Like, it's pretty separate. Wouldn't you?
I mean, I would say some days I don't even talk to you until you come home from work, because
Yeah.
we're in separate office buildings.
Right. You work from home and I go to an office. That's a good way that we make it work. Um, and the other thing is while we're on this topic, is we have pretty good boundaries when we're not working.
Mhm.
So when we take vacation or we're on a weekend, we've created some ground rules that, we don't talk about work. And if we do, sometimes the other person will kind of sharply remind the other that, hey, it's Saturday or we're on vacation. I don't want to talk.
Usually you say, "I'm not at work. I
Yeah.
don't want to talk about it."
Yeah. Yeah. So,
So
but
it
that's
is
good.
important. It's
It's
important.
important. You got to have the days off to kind of rejuvenate, and we don't want to talk about work. So, and our daughter Bailey also works in the business. And so we've created really good boundaries around that. We just took a family vacation, and work really didn't come up. We never talked about work. So I never even thought about work.
I never did either.
It
I
was,
never knew what day it was too.
I know,
So
that's the mark of
20,
good vacation right there.
yeah.
Um, so let's get into your role, which is now it was buyer specialist, but before was, I mentioned in the bio that you mentioned that I've replaced you at one point. So you want to tell that story? Because that's
Yes. So the first time I was working with you, it was probably right after you first started and you were doing everything. And so you asked me to, this is where you were trying to be my boss. And you started asking me to do things. And we had three small children at home, and if I didn't get to call somebody or if I didn't do something, you would say, did you do this or did you do that or you need to do this? And so I dropped the ball a couple of times, I admit it. And so you came home from work one day and you go, yeah, I hired Morgan. And this was someone I think that you'd been referred to. And I said, oh, what is Morgan going to do? And you started saying all the things Morgan's going to do. And I said, but that's what I do. And I said, am I being fired? And you said, yeah, I guess so. So you kind of quietly fired me.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
Before there was quiet quitting, there was quiet firing, I guess. Uh,
yeah. And then it worked out though, because I couldn't do it. And
the
I wasn't
business.
doing the right things. Um, I was doing some brokering and you want me to do some sales calls, and that just wasn't something I was comfortable doing. And so it just wasn't on my priority to do. And so that's why I had to be replaced.
Right. Yeah.
But when I did come back,
Several years later, it was like 5, 6 years later.
at least,
And then once the kids were sort of a little bit more self-sufficient.
I think once everyone was out of elementary school and maybe Bailey was driving, I came back to work and I worked from home and you had an office, and that worked really well because I became the buyer specialist. And then I had my job to do and you had your job to do. So that's that's why it worked the second time around. And I
Yeah.
can't get fired anymore.
No, you're an integral part of the whole machine now, and
So,
you are the first point of contact with buyers on our team. Now, there's a Canada team that operates separately, and they have you have a counterpart that so
mhm.
but for our team, you are the initial point of contact for buyers, and once they register, you help kind of get them paired up with the practices that they want to see. And um, yeah, so
So I'm the matchmaker.
you're the matchmaker. What are you looking for in a buyer? What are you looking for? What tells you like, hey, this is a good buyer?
Well, I mean, there's not one thing. So when I talk to a buyer, I like to ask them a lot of questions, of course, because I ask questions all the time.
Mhm.
But I like to know why they want to buy a practice. I like to know what their motivation is. And that's when you can tell if they're really serious or if they're just tire kickers. Um, so their motivation, I like to know, what are they looking for? Are they looking for a traditional brick and mortar practice? Or are they looking for a cloud firm? Are they looking for a particular area? So I just kind of ask them all those questions. And on the seller side, when we get a listing, we have a call with the seller. And one of the things that I ask the seller is describe your ideal buyer. And so I take notes. And so when I'm talking to a buyer and they are kind of checking off some of those boxes, and I feel like if I like them and I feel like they've got that right experience, or all those things, then I feel like, okay, this is the buyer. This is the buyer for this practice. Um, I tell buyers all the time, that we don't pick the buyer for the seller. It's not like buying a house. And so just because you like this practice or it's the right price or in the right location, it doesn't necessarily mean it's the right practice for them. It might not be the right fit. The sellers pick their own buyers by the buyer profile. And so when I send the practice profile to a buyer and they're interested, they'll send me back their buyer profile. And the things that I tell buyers and sellers to really pay close attention to is what about this practice do you feel you're a good fit for? What do you like about this practice? And that's where that buyer really can shine and say, you know, all the things that they think is great about this practice and why they think they would be great in this practice. And that's why I don't like to recycle buyer profiles. A lot of times buyers will say,
Yeah.
I've already sent one, just use the one I did last time. And
So let me just give people a little context about what this buyer profile is. It's a one pager, and we do ask some of the most really pertinent questions that helps the seller pick, who they want to have a conversation with. And, and we do have a variety of different practices that have different levels of interest. So some practices have a lot of interest on them, and some have, less than a lot of interest on them. So um, you could be in a very competitive environment. You could be in a different sort of environment as a buyer, but that buyer profile is crucial. And that's what you're talking about. It's that one pager. It's the thing that the sellers really it's the first thing that our sellers see on a buyer to help them decide who to spend time with.
Well, and so if I'm just recycling one from another practice and the seller gets to that part that says, what do you like about my practice? And you say, well, it's because it's in Texas and this practice is in Virginia. The seller's going to go, well, that's not even for me. And if that buyer is not going to take the time to fill out a buyer profile for my practice, then I don't want to take the time to speak with them. And so it's very important, I think. And I think buyers need to realize that these sellers are looking at multiple buyer profiles. And if they want that shot to have that meeting, they need to make their buyer profile shine.
Mm-hmm.
And so, like I said, we don't pick the buyer for the seller picks their own buyer. And sometimes buyers will get upset because they didn't get picked. And they're like, well, the seller didn't even talk to me. How do they know they don't want to speak with me? How do they know I'm not right for the practice? And it's like, well, was your buyer profile?
Yeah, and yeah, the seller may see the level of experience and say, no, this is right, or they may notice that there's some other things that could disqualify them. Like how they want to pay for the practice or how they want to finance the practice. So there's some things that that sellers are looking at.
Hey listener, are you thinking about selling your accounting practice? In our latest book, Prepare Your CPA Firm for a Sale, we dive into all the questions, from knowing when to sell to finding the right buyer and how to set yourself up for a smooth exit. Download a free copy today at PoeGroupAdvisors.com/prepare.
Hi, this is Liesl from Poe Group Advisors. If you're enjoying this episode and you're thinking about selling your firm, check out our recent episode with Clay Blakely, where we dive into his experience on selling his accounting practice and the do's and don'ts of how to smoothly transition. Or if you're in the market to acquire a firm and need some pointers, check out our episode with recent buyer Ravi Patel. Thanks for listening, and now back to the episode.
A lot of sellers want to know, like, well, what sort of buyers do you have? And I tell them, like, we have a variety. We have individual buyers, we have private equity firm buyers, we have bigger firms buying smaller firms, and we have, just buyers in all 50 states and all provinces of Canada. Anything you want to comment on, like different buyer? Sometimes a private equity buyer is not going to be suitable for a seller if the seller wants to exit extremely rapidly and that private equity firm doesn't have staff that can come in and run a firm.
Well, that's what a lot of times I say to buyers. One of the first things I ask them is like, how much experience do you have? If they don't have any experience, I may even suggest you might want to go to work for an accounting practice, to get some of that experience. You don't want to buy something and then realize I don't have anybody to do the work, or if you're, sometimes buyers think, well, I'm just going to promote people in the practice and have them be managers. And I'm like, well, what if there's not anyone, if you don't know if they're doing the work correctly, how do you know it's being done? Like you need to have some level of understanding, or you need to have, if it's a private equity firm, I tell them a lot of times you need to identify who is going to be running the practice before you buy it, because that seller is going to want to talk to the person that's going to be actually running the practice.
Right. Right. And yeah, and a lot of times though, I know you finish a phone call with a buyer and you have this gut reaction that, oh, this is who's going to buy this practice. I mean, that happens a lot.
A lot.
What is it about that conversation or about that buyer do you think gives you that confidence? Because a lot of times you're right. It's not 100%, but a lot of times you're right about that. What are you looking for, or what is it that gets you excited about a buyer to where you have that feeling?
I have to like them, like I have to have a good connection with them, I think, and a good conversation. I want to know, like I feel like someone that's buying an accounting practice needs to be entrepreneurial. So they can't be the typical bean counter and stuffy, like what you would think like old accountants to be. And so,
Like a stereotypical technician
yes,
who's talking in ways that are just really technical speak, and they don't have that soft skill. The soft skills are not there, is what you're saying.
yes. Well, and if they're asking questions that I feel like are just the technical questions and not like how they're going to run it or what their hopes are, like
Their vision.
their vision.
You're talking to people that have some vision.
And if
And
they don't have any vision and they're just asking like, well, how much will they take for the practice? And, um, I feel like you have to want it, and you have to have, skills and personal skills. One of the things that when I talk to sellers, the one question when I say, what are you looking for in a buyer? They always say, I want a buyer that's going to take really good care of my clients and really good care of my staff. I've never had a seller say, just find me somebody.
right, right. Just give me a check. Just give me a
Mhm.
check. Yeah. Although the check is important. They want
The
the check.
check is, but I think, so I'm always looking for the people that I feel like, okay, if I know this seller is looking for a buyer that, is laid back and has these sorts of skills or these personable skills. It's not always the technical skills, it's the personable skills. And so when I'm talking to people, I think that's the part that I pay most attention to
Mhm.
is how likable are they?
Yeah. Well, you got to maintain the culture of the firm, and you've got to be pleasant enough to deal with clients and to be able to grow the practice. But when you're talking about vision, it reminds me of a deal that we did a couple of years ago in Nashville, Tennessee, and we had a buyer from Dallas, and prior to that, we had the deal under contract, and it ended up just for one reason or another, it didn't work out. I can't remember the reason why that previous buyer didn't close the deal. But this buyer from Texas came in and had this amazing vision of where this firm was going to go. And we knew right away that this was going to work really well. And it did. It worked really well. And so I followed up with that buyer, years after, because they actually might purchase again. And just that vision inspired the entire team to bond with them and get excited about that vision as well. And it actually breathed new life into the practice. And yeah, so I think the vision of the owner is super, super important.
I think so too. And I think also I tell buyers ask me about retention. How am I going to keep the clients? That's probably one of the number one things that people ask me when we're on the phone. And I tell them, well, it's not up to the seller to keep the clients because they're not working there anymore. It's up to the buyer. And I said, you need to, as long as you service those clients the same way the seller did, or even better, then you're going to be more successful. And the clients are going to stay and the staff's going to stay. I said, but if you don't do the work and make that effort, no one's going to stay.
Yeah. Yeah.
I kind of say like this. I'll say, imagine if you were married to someone who had a divorced spouse. So let's say that your wife's ex-husband constantly was telling you the things she liked, and this is the type of food she likes, or this is what you would constantly resent that. And I said, if a seller stays on for a long time, that's kind of a situation, because the clients are going to still go to that seller. The staff is still going to go to that seller. And I said, you've basically bought a job that you don't even have any control over. So the sooner the seller's gone, the better it's going to be for you.
Yeah.
Just do a good job.
Yeah.
And and I said, and if you are doing a good job and you were picked by the seller, so it's a good fit, then that seller's going to go out there and they're going to sing praises. They're going to be on the golf course talking about you. They're going to go to CPE and tell everybody about you. And I said, it's not a bad idea to still invite them if they want to come to office parties or things like that. I said, you just got to keep that good connection and good service, and everything will work out. You just gotta do the work.
What is like one of your funnier client stories? I mean, we've had some interesting stories over the years, but what's one that's like really stands out, kind of funny?
So one of the funniest stories, I think, and craziest stories I've ever had was I had a buyer call me, and he said, I want to sell my job. And I thought it was a joke. I thought it was one of your college buddies calling and playing a joke on me. And so I said, sure, we can sell your job. How much do you want for it? And so he starts telling me, and I'm still thinking it's like Ed or Doug. And I'm like, this is a joke. And he's like, 5 minutes in, I realized, no, he's serious. He's trying to sell his job. He doesn't like his boss. And so he needs to sell his job. And I said, well, he starts telling me about him. And I said, well, if he's that bad, I don't think we could sell it. I don't think anybody would want it. And then I said, have you thought of getting another job? And I can't remember how we ended it, but it was very, very strange. And he was very serious. He wanted a lot for that job too.
Yeah, that's wow, that's crazy. Yeah, well, I always ask my guests about a book. So, can you give a book recommendation?
Well, I don't read business books, as you know. So ironically, I've never heard one of your podcasts, but I've heard they're really good.
I bet you'll listen to this one though.
I don't know. We'll see. So I am currently reading a historical fiction by Kristen Hanna called The Women, and it is set in the Vietnam era about a nurse. It's very good.
It's not a beach read though.
Well, it's February.
Yeah.
But it's it's kind of heavy, but it's good. I mean, it's an easy read.
Right.
I guess if I were at the beach, I could read it at the beach.
Yeah. Well, what's the best way for people to connect with you online?
Ooh, don't call me. No, I'm just kidding. I take calls by appointment, and you can reach me by either our website at Poe Group Advisors, or you can reach me on my email at cpoe@Poe Group Advisors. And if you shoot me an email and you want to speak with me, I will send you a link to my Calendly, and we'll get it on the books and have a conversation.
Nice. Well, this has been an interesting, you've definitely been my most distinguished guest so far.
Oh.
So thanks for coming on the podcast,
Well, thank you for having me.
and happy Valentine's Day.
Happy Valentine's Day to you too.
Thanks for listening to the Accountant's Flight Plan podcast. If you like what you heard today, please follow us so that you can get updates when new episodes are released, and share our podcast with your friends and colleagues. You can also follow Poe Group Advisors on social media. Please visit our website for more information at poegroupadvisors.com.